Hey guys, welcome back! Today we are going to paint a simple bow using only 2 colors and leaving white space for the highlights. I will be using watercolor pencils, but you can also apply the principles with watercolors. A full list of materials is in the description below. First, let's start talking about the line drawing. The anatomy of the bow is important to understand, and you need to decide how detailed you want the bow to be. For today's video, I decided to use a simple illustration as it allows me to really show the amazing color gradient that you can achieve with watercolor pencils, and because I can really show how to use white space, which can make your painting really pop. Too many details, like folds, would distract from that. Once you are happy with the line drawing, you can remove all unnecessary markings with an eraser. Let's start using the watercolor pencils. First, I mark the area that I will leave white with a light border using the watercolor pencil that I will be using for that segment of the bow. It is important to pick your colors in advance. We are going to use only 2 colors for this painting. If you want to make your painting pop, use 2 contrasting colors for your masterpiece, or 2 colors that have a larger color difference. In order to get the color just right, I tested on a sheet of paper. Next, I will color in the purple area with a light layer of pigment from the watercolor pencil. Hold the pencil sideways so that you don't leave any lines on the paper. I will leave a small gap between the watercolor pencil and the pencil line, and I will fill that in later when I activate the watercolor pencil. This helps to create a straight line and it will set you up for success. Working in sections is really beneficial with watercolor pencils, especially for the first layer. When coloring in the entire bow first with the pencils, you can smudge the pigment on the paper or transfer it accidentally to other areas even before you activate it. Also, by working in sections, you minimize the chance of colors bleeding into each other. Once the purple area is filled in with watercolor pencil, it's time to activate it. In order to activate it, take a brush and fill it with water. When you apply the water to the watercolor pencil, the pigment will practically melt and be ready to be moved around. With cheaper watercolor pencils, or if you press too hard, it may require a bit of scrubbing to loosen the pigment. I start by applying water to the white area where the highlight is and work my way towards the area that has more intense colors. This is how I can easily create a soft gradient in color. Remember that the pigment can leave stains on the page if you move it in the wrong areas. So don't rely on being able to remove it. Also, don't leave puddles on the paper, as these will be visible in the final artwork. In conclusion, control the amount of water in your brush and regulate it. When you stroke the brush along the rim of your water glass before using it, you have a good chance that it is just the right amount of water. Every watercolor pencil brand works best with an individual amount of water, and every paper absorbs the water at a different rate. So play around with it and start small. Another tip to make life easier is to move the paper around and turn it upside down. This makes some areas easier to reach, and it may be easier to paint straight lines for you at different angles. Let's move on and work on the blue areas. When using watercolors, you always apply the lightest color first and then intensify or darken the color with the next layer. One of the reasons for this is that you cannot use a lighter color to cover a darker color. This principle also applies to watercolor pencils, but for this painting I chose a different route. Let me explain. First, I use the darker purple at first because it makes it easier for me to see how dark the blue needs to be. Second, every piece of this bow will be colored in using one color only. Going from lights to darks makes sense when painting in a multicolored leaf with patterns and veins. but I already know where my dark values will be. I do not need to work my way up to them. Third, I already have the lightest colors established. Those are the white highlights I marked out earlier. Now I'm directly skipping to working on the medium tones. This is why I feel confident applying the proper amount of pigment with the watercolor pencil for the medium values. Let's work on the second layer. I intensify the colors towards the more shaded areas of the bow using the same method as before. I apply watercolor pencil to the paper and activate it with a wet brush. The paper might need a few more minutes to dry before continuing. If you paint in sections in the same order as the first layer, then the first pieces should already be dry enough to continue to paint. Watercolor pencil dries really fast, as not a lot of water is required. 5 or 10 minutes is usually good enough for it to be safe to be touched without smudging colors. If you want to add another layer of watercolor pencil, you should wait longer to make sure that the paper is completely dry. If the paper is still a little moist, it is easy to break it with the watercolor pencils. So far, the illustration looks rather pale. The goal with this layer is to intensify the color and therefore the contrast with the white highlight. A beautiful soft color gradient will underline this. A soft gradient also makes it easier for the eye to see where one part ends and the other part begins. So don't be afraid of using too intense colors. The areas around the edges that are darker will appear round to the eye if you get them dark enough. This layer and gradient will set up the groundwork towards the really dark shadows that will be added in the next step. But first, let me show you how to correct some details that might go wrong during the painting process. You can gently remove some of the pencil with an eraser, but only if it has not yet been activated. Make sure that the eraser is clean, or you might remove the watercolor pencil but leave some marks on the paper with the eraser. This can be marks from watercolor pencils that you erased earlier. You need a hard eraser for this. A kneaded eraser won't do the job. Sometimes the gradient is too hard or patchy. I go in with a wet brush and scrub the paint gently to lift it and move it. It is easy to unintentionally lift some of the paint from the previous layers if you scrub too much. Not doing it is more a matter of knowing your watercolor pencil and your paper. Knowing your limits is also important. This is why I sometimes take pigment straight off the pencil to fix it. Hard 90-degree corners are always hard to paint. If you can, avoid them. When the corner is too hard, I try to round it. Here I use the darker purple paint to paint over the sharp blue corner to make it more round. When your straight line did not come out as straight, you can try to enlarge the segment. Here I enlarged the purple piece a little, taking away from the blue. This only worked because the purple is darker than the blue. The first color, the blue, needs to be completely dry. When an area came out darker or more patchy than expected, try to loosen the paint with a wet brush and soak it up with a paper towel. Let it dry completely before working on it again. And now my all-time favorite issue, paint prints. I touched the wet paint with my hand without noticing it and left traces somewhere else. The easiest solution is to use a wet brush to loosen the paint by scrubbing it and then soaking it up with a paper towel. Some paints stain the page. Then you might want to change plans and add some splatters to your painting. Random hard edges in your painting are easy to solve. Lift some paint with a wet brush, and you probably want to add another layer of paint after that. They are really easy to disguise this way. Once everything is dry, let's move on to the third and final layer. This is where the illustration really comes to life. The most important trick here is not to be afraid of going too dark. I start by adding all the blue shadows first, as this is the lightest color and the blue has a limit to how dark it can be. This also makes it easier to see how dark the purple needs to be. If the blue you are using is just not getting intense enough, you might want to think about adding the shadows with a different pencil color. In order to really intensify the shadows and shaded areas, I take the pigment straight off of the pencil. Adding the shadows in multiple layers by painting it on the paper and then activating it would just take too long. Also, there is a limit to how many layers the paper can accept without breaking or getting too flat for any pencil to rub off on it. This bow does not have any creases or folds, as I want to draw attention to the highlight and the color gradient. More creases, especially on the fabric, would make it look more realistic, but also distract from the amazing color gradient used in this illustration. When you decide to add creases to the bow, my best advice is to find a really high quality picture where you can see all the shadows in detail, and you will have to add those as well. The shadows are added in two areas. First, the actual really shaded areas. For example, the small blue bow casts a shadow on the larger purple bow. Adding those shadows will make the blue bow pop off the page. Second, the areas that are shaded due to their shape. For example, the outer edge of the purple bow. Looking at it from a side will reveal that the fabric is rounded. The light will not hit this area as much, as it is further away in a distance. Adding a shadow there will allow the eye to see the shape. Here you see me blend out the purple pigment with a moist brush to increase the intensity of the color gradient. I allow the pigment to bleed into the moist area and manually move it around a little. Once the blue layer dried, I decided to add more pigment to intensify the shadows in some areas. Painting with pigment directly from the pencil is almost like painting with watercolors. Depending on the brand of watercolors you are using, the amount of pigment on your brush can be even more intense than as if you take it directly from a watercolor set. The reason why I don't just dip the pencil in water before applying it to the paper is easy. First off, the wood would soak up with water and it can break the pencil over time. Second, it is pointless, because only the outer layer of the pigment would be activated, transfer on the paper really fast into lines, and then I would have to dip it in the water glass again. Third, adding this type of intense color in one line would leave a mark and make it impossible to achieve a gradient. I love this stage of the painting process, as I can really see things come together. Please let me know in the comments below which part of the painting process you enjoy most. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like it, subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you soon with the next video.